Hello, my name is Alex Isles, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at Roman politics again and the emperorship of Septimius Severus and then the crisis of the 3rd century. Welcome back. So in today's episode, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at Septimius Severus and the crisis of the 3rd century. Now this is a part of a larger series where we've been looking at Roman politics. So we started off in the Age of Kings, went through the Republic and some of the changes that occurred in the Roman Republic. Then in the last episode we looked at Augustus, and now we're looking at a really pivotal figure in the Roman imperial system, and this is Septimius Severus. Now we're going to look at his changes and how he transformed the Roman system in his own way. So that's a really interesting one there. If I've caught your interest and you aren't already, please subscribe, because I think you'll enjoy the content I make here on this channel, and I look forward to sharing more as we go on. But let's jump right into this and discuss Septimius Severus as a person. Now, to start off with, what's really interesting about Septimius Severus is that he wasn't originally from the senatorial class. Now, the emperors of the Principe, which is where the emperors acknowledged the authority of the Senate, were actually from the senatorial classes. Now, the senatorial classes, you have to understand the way Roman society was structured. So in Roman society, the lowest rank of people were obviously slaves. Then after slaves, it was foreigners, freemen, citizens, the equestrians, which was a knightly class, then the senatorial class, the emperor's family, and then the emperor right at the top. So that was roughly how the pyramid worked. The power was structured right at the top with the emperor and the senators and those important wealthy individuals, and then below them you had the equestrians. Now, many equestrians, even though they weren't a part of these ancient families of Rome, were still hugely wealthy and powerful individuals, and so they controlled and had important roles in the politics of the empire all the way around it. And Septimius Severus was an equestrian. On his mother's side, he was descended from Italian aristocrats, and when they were descended from Italian aristocrats, he had that heritage. On his father's side, he was descended from the Carthaginians. Now this is a really interesting point, because during the Republican period, Carthage was Rome's greatest enemy. It was an empire of similar status and power to Rome that was competing for the Western Mediterranean. And Carthage had started off as a colony of the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians were a people who existed in what is today modern day Israel and Palestine. And when they existed in modern-day Israel and Palestine, they were a trading nation, and they set up a great deal of colonies throughout the Western Mediterranean, colonizing parts of Spain, North Africa, and also places like Sicily and also southern France. And when they set up these colonies, they would then become very wealthy through the trade networks that enabled the Phoenicians to have access to. Phoenicia was then conquered, and when it was conquered, one of its colonies, Carthage, became more powerful than it. And when it became more powerful, it overshadowed it and dominated the Western Mediterranean. They worshipped the same gods, were culturally similar, and actually had a great deal of influence over the Western Mediterranean, but came to blows with Rome over the control of Sicily. So when they came over the control of Sicily, eventually that resulted in 3 wars, and then Rome finally conquered them fully. The Romans respected the Carthaginians, but also had conquered them and taken over and settled, and many Romans had then settled in North Africa, in Spain and other locations like that. The Romans had then taken over North Africa, Spain and other locations where previously the Carthaginians had been in control, and Romans settled in that location, and citizenship and equestrianship was granted to many Carthaginians over time. So because of that, Septimius Severus' father was descended from Carthaginian families, but he was a Roman. So from that, you then get Septimius Severus. Now, if you go online and you type in Septimius Severus, you'll notice there has been recent arguments over his ethnicity. Now, because of the fact his father was descended from Carthaginian or Phoenician stock, it's very likely that he was Levantine in his ethnicity. So if you think of today, the populations who live in Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, those sort of areas, you'll get an understanding of likely his ethnicity. It has been emphasized by some people that he was African. And so because of that, you can see some of his depictions have depicted his ethnicity slightly differently. I don't want to get into that argument, and I really hope in the comments section we can avoid it. But I just wanted to clarify that before I continue, because it is something that has caused arguments in the past, and I know that that can be difficult and controversial depending on your politics, your view of history and things like that. But it's important for his story that we understand that he came from Carthaginian and Phoenician stock, because that fact was very important with the way he interacted with the Roman Senate. So following on from that, he was a military leader, and he went up through the ranks of military and also civilian roles in the career progression of a young gentleman in Rome. But while he was a young man, the Antonine Plague broke out during the reign of Antonius Pius, and so a number of senatorial families were wiped out, and they needed new people of promise who would step into the rank of senator and become senators. And so he was the right place at the right time, and he was made into a senator. From there, he went through his military career and was very, very successful, and eventually ended up in Pannonia. And when he was in Pannonia, Commodus died. And this then caused for a civil war. A number of people were declared emperor at the same time, and Septimius Severus was one of them. His troops proclaimed him emperor, and he fought against the other rivals, allying himself to Albinus. And Albinus was the governor of Britain. So when he allied himself to Albinus, him and Albinus worked together and helped to put down the other rival claimants. But then Septimius Severus proclaimed his son Caracalla co-emperor. Now, originally the first deal was that Septimius Severus would rule as emperor and his co-emperor would be Albinus, the governor of Britain. As soon as Albinus saw that Caracalla had been made co-emperor with Septimius Severus, he knew he needed to fight. Because basically Septimius Severus would put him to death. He would kill him and get rid of him because he now had put his son as co-emperor, and he was not going to go back on that. His son was much closer to him, and it continued the imperial family that Septimius Severus was going to build around himself. Why would he allow his former ally to now continue to be emperor? It wasn't the case. So Albinus crossed over from the British Isles, and then at Lugudunum they had a battle. And when they had a battle at Lyon, modern-day Lyon in France, that resulted in Septimius Severus killing Albinus, and then from there he becomes the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. When he becomes the sole emperor, he focuses on being a military leader and also being very authoritarian. And when he is a militaristic leader, he doubles the soldiers' pay. Now this starts the problems of inflation within the empire. Now in the last episode I mentioned the soldiers are loyal to the emperor, but their pay hasn't increased in line for what they want it to increase. And Septimius Severus sees the importance of the army. And when he sees the importance of the army, he doubles their pay. And so when he's doubled their pay, the soldiers now have more money and they're starting to become more and more influential in society. But because they have more money, the value of the currency that is being printed and the quality of the silver in the coins starts to go down. Not rapidly at first, but starts to go down because of the fact that they need more coins to pay for this huge army that the Roman Empire has. Following on from that as well, he also loves being at the front of the army, and he leads the army very, very, very effectively. And as he leads the army very effectively, he goes out and he fights, but he isn't interested in the administration of the empire. So he does something that is actually quite interesting. He lets his wife, Julia Domina, administer and run the empire as empress. Now this is incredibly interesting when we study this whole time period and what's going on, because suddenly the empress is having a direct role in the politics, which I'm sure other empresses did, but it seems that Septimius Severus fully delegates all of that to his wife. He's not interested in any of the administration or like the soft politics. He's only interested in hard politics at the edge of a cutting sword in battle and in warfare and things like that. And from that, he totally and utterly ignores the Senate. Every other emperor or claimant to the empire had previously tried to be recognized by the Senate. He doesn't feel he needs to. He's become emperor and he just ignores the Senate and he ignores their authority, and he styles himself as authoritarian ruler with the backing of the military. And so that is a massive shift as well. And he goes out of his way to do things that offend and upset the Senate as well. A really good example of this is his attitude towards Hannibal Barca. So Hannibal was the great Carthaginian general who nearly managed to defeat the Romans. He took elephants over the Alps. He was a fantastic strategist, fantastic general, and had been raised by his father to absolutely loathe and hate the Romans with every fibre of his being. Now, he was seen as one of Rome's greatest enemies and opponents. So what does Septimius Severus do? The enemy of the Roman Republic, Hannibal Barca, the man who had nearly defeated the Romans, who had been one of their greatest opponents ever, he covers his tomb in marble. Now that is one heck of a political statement. If you think of your nation's worst enemy in history, I won't say any out loud just so you can think of one of the worst enemy of your nation, your people, and then your prime minister, president, leader, king, governor, whatever political system you're under, suddenly took marble and aggrandized the tomb of your nation's enemy. That there shows you Septimius Severus, because on one hand it shows that he felt totally secure to do that. He knew there would be no political backlash and that the Senate couldn't do anything to him, that he was fully in control and that he would be able to do this without any problems. And on the other hand as well, it also shows total disregard to the Roman Republic, and he's honouring his Carthaginian ancestry but as a Roman. So again, you're seeing this wonderful sort of melting pot mixture of Romanness, where he is a Roman, he's ruling as an emperor, but he's honouring his Carthaginian ancestry. And so that sort of conflict within this character is an amazing way of looking at Roman power. And so that sets almost a mould where future leaders do not need to listen to the Senate and can do what they want. And so we see the position of emperor becoming more and more authoritarian during his reign. Now during this time, the northern Britain, the Picts, attack Hadrian's Wall, and there is an assault, so he needs to go over to Britain. Initially he bases himself in York, and he makes his way up to Carlisle, where recently there's actually been excavations at the cricket club at Carlisle, and they found the bathhouse, or the imperial bathhouse that was there, and it's massive. And when you have this imperial bathhouse, it's likely that the household of Septimius Severus was based there. So Julia Domina, the politicians, people like that, are there while Septimius Severus is doing a campaign. And he fights against the Caledonians and the Mannae, two tribes in what is today modern Scotland. And when he fights against them, he defeats them. And when he defeats them, he puts such a brutal peace treaty on them that they, from that point onwards, basically have to revolt. You're talking probably forced conscription, heavy taxation, taxing their food, taxing their resources. It's horrendous. It only lasts a year, and they revolt against him. And when they revolt against him, Septimius Severus absolutely loses his temper, and he issues a decree that his soldiers are to commit genocide, and they are to go and kill every man, woman and child, and even includes the pregnant women in this, and they are to be massacred. And we actually know from evidence where they can look at reforestation occurring in the area which is now Scotland, where previously areas had been farmed and people had lived there, forest regrew because the fact that there was no settlements nearby. We have actual archaeological evidence for this genocide. And so it seems that his plan was basically to kill every last human being in what is today Scotland and then replace them probably with Roman colonists, and therefore fully take over the island of Britain and centralise it against any assault in the future. When he does this, he catches an illness, probably a cold or an infection, goes down to York and dies in York, and that's where his sons, Caracalla and Geta, go and hairtail it back to Rome because they are being proclaimed co-emperor by their father, but he says to them, enrich the army and scorn everyone else. And that sets the template for the emperors that follow on with Caracalla and then the crisis of the 3rd century. Following on from that, all other emperors will likely follow this model where they enrich the army, focus upon the military, and scorn everyone else. And so the power of the Senate from that point on becomes far more ceremonial, far more marginalized than it has ever been. Caracalla then continues his military policies of his father, focuses on the army and lets his mother rule the administration for him until he finally dies. And when he finally dies, he is then succeeded by Egeblagus, who is another member of the Septimian dynasty. And Egeblagus has recently become quite famous within history, and the reason why is historians believe that he was probably trans. We have a source that says that he wanted to pay a huge sum of money to any doctor who would be able to make him a vagina. He was also involved in a number of Roman sex scandals, which made him very unpopular, and he struggled a great deal with issues of identity, but also alongside that as well was very tyrannical, and eventually it resulted in his murder. So Egeblagus was then succeeded by another member of the Septimian dynasty who is called Severus Alexander. Now, Severus Alexander ruled for a while and he did okay, but again, the problems that had then followed the dynasty with the fact that they were seen as authoritarian and many of the other issues as well plagued him. And also he was controlled a lot by the women of his family, such as his mother and his maternal grandmother, and that was seen as a problem. So Severus Alexander then was murdered, and then that death caused for 50 years of civil war in the Roman Empire. In 50 years, there were 26 generals and claimants who would proceed to try and become emperor. Some of them would rule for incredibly short periods of time, others would rule for much longer periods of time, but 26 and 50 years just shows you how unstable the crisis of the 3rd century was. People were constantly murdering each other, the empire was constantly in a state of civil war, and there was widespread inflation. The armies realized if they proclaimed their general as an emperor, then when he was victorious, he had to give them a bonus, a huge bonus, and then they would be in a position of power and authority over him. If a general was to refuse, they'd just murder him and replace him by someone who would want to become a claimant. And so you see that the military is now in some ways able to control weaker claimants, and any general in the 3rd century who had a minor victory was at great risk of being promoted to emperor. So often his men would be able to just turn to him and go, "You know what, boss? I think you look amazing in purple. Why not you march on Rome and we will make you emperor, and you can then give us a bonus, a victory bonus to us to say how much you are thankful to us for putting you in the imperial purple. And you know what? I sharpened my knife this morning, so if you don't, I'll kill you." Bam! Immediately you can see the effect of the pressure that these guys were under, but also the potential power of being the emperor, controlling so much land and being entirely in charge with the army at your beck and call. So you see a great deal of instability. And this instability is constantly preyed upon by claimants, by the army, by other people like that. And eventually the army splits in three. And when it's split in three, you get the Gallic Empire, which is Britain and France. You get the Central Empire, which is often seen as the legitimate one, which was Italy and Croatia and the core parts and parts of North Africa as well. And then you had the Eastern Empire, which was Palmyra, which was basically much of what is today Turkey and the Middle East and Egypt. So think of it as it's almost like the Fertile Crescent. They split into three. Many people say that those three empires were not Roman. They say that the Gallic Empire and the Palmyran Empire were splinter empires. They were going their own way. But if you look at the way the people who ruled those empires did it, they were doing it in the Roman fashion. Roman culture wasn't thrown out the window. Roman systems weren't thrown out the window. The tax system, the army, all of that stuff. It was more the fact that these empires recognized that they needed to have localized control, and that localized control stabilized the Gallic Empire, the Central Roman Empire, and then following on from that, the Palmyran Empire during this period. And so therefore, when a new emperor came up, Aurelian, he was able to reunify the empire, and it was in a stronger and better position during his reign from 270 AD to 275 as a united empire once more. And that was an important lesson to be learned as Aurelian reunified the empire and brought it all together. Unfortunately, even though he restored the empire, restored the economy, rebalanced everything, he ended up like many of the claimants in that period and was assassinated. There were then more usurpers until finally we come to Diocletian and his tetrarchy. So that's the cliffhanger I'm going to leave you on at the end of this episode. The next person we'll be talking about is Diocletian and his tetrarchy, who has another major shift in the way the empire works by looking at regional control and the inheritance system for the empire to stabilize things after the crisis of the 3rd century. So I really hope you've enjoyed the episode today. So why don't you like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and if you'd like to support me further, I also have a Ko-fi account and a Patreon account down in the description. That just means that I can set aside time for these episodes and to really focus on bringing the history to life for you. As you can see, I obviously have a passion for. In the meantime though, stay safe and well, and I look forward to sharing more history of the Roman Empire's politics with you in another episode in the near future. Until then though, stay safe and well, and thank you so much.